Peter, it's time for me to harass you with more questions. Hopefully, you're in the mood for that.
Always in the mood, always in the mood.
This week, I'd like to talk about the expectation of greatness. Now, anyone in the executive class has had to live with certain expectations on them for a very long time, I'm sure. So, first of all, is greatness something that society tends to expect of executives more, or is it something they demand of themselves more, do you think?
I've always thought of greatness in terms of the expectation of greatness as a personal goal.
Right.
This is at what level I want to work and produce and be seen. So it's greatness with a small g. It's greatness that can sit side by personal humility.
Mm.
To me, it's I'm going to do the very best that I can. Everything that I do must be the very best that I can do. That approach to life and approach to work can often come from a particular life as a child, whether it be a challenged life or whether it be a charmed life. Parents expecting a child to always come first, and that child has taken that and brings it to their children as well. Obviously, sometimes that expectation drives a child to the opposite because they weren't able to achieve what their parents wanted them to achieve. So greatness to me is we're all born, I think, with an extraordinary ability to cope. We're born with an extraordinary ability, even from the first couple of hours, of finding nourishment, finding warmth, and finding love. And if we can't find it, we know how to find it. We scream, we cry, we wriggle. And from then on in, it's about survival. So it's at what level you want to survive. And again, the psychologist will talk about 100 different ways that a person describes what is their comfortable space, what their greatness is. I'm a romantic, though. And when I grew up, I looked at people whose greatness was romantic. Their greatness was clear and obvious to everyone around them. They were explorers. They were great writers. They were humanists. They were the people at the top of the medical profession, the people at the top of the sporting profession. I remember the first time I went to see Australia play cricket. The men who walked out onto that cricket pitch with the Australian cap on and the men who walked out with the English cap on were, to me, great men,
Mm.
absolutely great men. So that's sometimes redescribed as the hero in history. And sometimes we've had the hero as the leader, as the influencer. So some people grapple easily with the idea of their own greatness. Some people allow it to become arrogance. And some people attract the energy and power around them to be theirs only.
Mm.
And therefore it's theirs exclusively. And that's where it starts to run off the rails.
Why do we expect leaders to be exceptional at everything? Do you think we do?
Look, take the customer of a bank. Assume that customer is earning somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000 a year, is looking after a family or with their partner is maybe sharing the looking after of the family, the financial looking after the family. They, increase the house every so often. They have holidays. But the decisions about their mortgages, the decisions about their debt and their financial structure that they put in the hands of the banks, the decisions are being made by people who are earning $900,000 a year plus bonuses. This is huge money.
Mm.
So what does the person expect from someone who earns that sort of money? They expect miracles. They expect these people to perform out of the normal. And yet those salaries have become so normal that the people who are receiving them forget the expectations of the people who they're serving. And it gets worse. If you take superannuation, for instance, some of the superannuation companies are dealing with people whose income may be $100,000 to $150,000 a year. And all they expect, the clients expect, is that they get a good return on their money. They suddenly find that the executives in the superannuation firm are earning similar sort of wages of $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 plus bonuses, and they don't understand why at that level their returns are going down. These people should be able to perform miracles.
It's all salary based, do you think?
Yes, but simply because someone at that level says, well, if these people are earning that sort of money, I'm entitled to expect that they work miracles.
Mm.
In the same way, I recently, or a few years ago, went in for an operation. The surgeon quoted me for the operation, and I immediately, having agreed to that quote, expected that he would create miracles. I expected at that sort of money, for the short time he was going to be fiddling around in my body, that he would do things, number one, to cure me, and number two, to keep it all neat and tidy.
Yeah.
That's what my now. Had he come back to me and said, "No, Peter, it was worse than we expected when we hopped in there," that's one thing. But when he came back and said, "Well, no, it was actually quite simple, but I actually cut a few nerves I shouldn't have cut," but there you go. That really did rankle me, because I still had the expectation that that sort of money, I didn't get that sort of what I describe or I feel was third-rate service.
Okay.
So if I was a multi-millionaire and I put all my money with an investment advisor, and I knew that investment advisor was making $33 million a year, I would expect that my returns would be extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was wondering whether there was something just that we expect from those of us who have the leadership qualities, whether we have unreasonable expectations of them.
But that expectation is for people outside the organisation.
Mm.
People inside the organisation who are reporting into or reporting up to those sorts of people, their expectation is slightly different. Their expectation, their need is primarily for safety, that they will be made safe, that whatever happens, they will be kept safe by this person in whom they've, I suppose, appointed confidence, appointed some loyalty to them, that they will be looked after. And when they're not looked after, that's, again, where it all starts crumbling down, where organisations such as banks, for instance, suddenly offshore 3,000 jobs, and man and wife, 3 or 4 kids suddenly can't get a new car and are suddenly running around at the age of 40 looking for a new job. So greatness in that moment has to have elements of rightness and quality and justice. So to take it further away from the dollar value, greatness, depending on where you're talking about, will have elements of accountability and responsibility. It'll have elements of humility, perhaps, elements of doing the right thing, elements of providing safety and security to people. So the expectation of greatness is very much environmental and situational. It can't operate clearly and easily under a generalist definition.
Makes sense. Is there much difference practically between an executive that you feel is being driven by the need to be great, or an executive who's driven by the fear of being ordinary?
I don't think there are too many executives that are driven by the fear of being ordinary. I think they're normally driven by the fear of being found out. The imposter syndrome is alive and well in most executives. Whether it should be alive and well in executives is a matter for the particular executive. I think the imposter syndrome is a guarantee of assessment with some executives. They shouldn't be there. They simply shouldn't be there.
I would have thought that imposter syndrome is kind of more just a reflection of your ability to question yourself. But do you see it as more than that when it comes to, again, somebody in that executive class.
Yes. For instance, since the 1980s, probably a little bit before then, we have allowed businesses to be divided into centres of excellence, as they used to call them. So a bank would have the business bank administration, and if we're talking about Sydney, sitting in the CBD near Hyde Park. It would have the retail banks administration, maybe sitting down in Redfern somewhere. So it would have them all, and IT would be somewhere else. And it would have these big buildings containing a particular silo or area. So finance would be in another area. And that design was so that we could have all the really clever people in retail banking in the one building. And you'd have competition for each of the people in the retail banking area to get to the top. So they ended up being pretty well the same as each other. There would be one or two people who would glide to the top because they just were exceptional, just exceptional people. They'd glide to the top. There'd be other people that would scramble to the top because of the politics or because of who they knew or because of what they knew, and they would get to the top. And those people would quite often almost rightly suffer from imposter syndrome because they knew that they were in a position they didn't fully understand and that they were going to rely on a whole lot of other people and take credit for their work. When we said, okay, well, that doesn't work anymore, those sort of silos, we want to have a more holistic organisation where everybody's involved, we couldn't pull down all the silos, put them all together. We have to keep the silos, but we have to open up communication between the expertise. So between a business banker and a retail banker and an institutional banker and something else, or a different sort of mining and a mining company, or different kinds of professions within the medical world. And that made it even more difficult for people to hold high positions because they were then taken away just to rely on their subject matter expertise of the last 20 years. They had to start learning a whole new expertise. They had to start learning about institutional banking or some of those areas. And they soon came to the stage where their imposter syndrome would be rampant, and quite often their behaviour was to drag other people down with them as well, get other people to do the work for them, take credit for other people. And in the, I suppose, last 10 years or so, that has become quite rampant.
So it's quite a black and white thing. If you're an executive with some imposter syndrome, that's probably because you shouldn't be there.
No, there are many great executives, really great executives, who have, through their own humility, the imposter syndrome.
Right, yes.
I mean, I really should. And they're people that you celebrate the imposter syndrome. You say, look, use it as a bit of an alarm bell. Don't try and kill it completely. It'll just tell you whether you might be stepping too far or too fast. But generally, you're never going to move it. And I've often, perhaps not so much anymore, but often found women have had an imposter syndrome in order to deal with the unfair treatment that some have received from the structure, or the male structure, of large organisations.
Subconsciously institutional thing, perhaps.
Yes. It's interesting that in the political world, the imposter syndrome doesn't seem to have much of a life. For some reason, I've not met many politicians who suffer from the imposter syndrome. In fact, it's quite whatever the opposite to the imposter syndrome is. They tend to push that. But yeah, the imposter syndrome is either a very healthy assessment that you shouldn't be there, or it's a kind of a warning sign that you may need to slow down, or you may need to be careful about the people around you.
Yes,
but it's certainly not black and white.
You're right about those politicians, though. If only a few of them had some of the questioning needed to have imposter syndrome. So we've talked a bit about dealing with imposter syndrome and so on. What kind of other emotional costs are there for the executive when so much is expected of them and they're always the person that everyone depends on.
The idea that we've depended on executives for a lot has suffered a little bit of dilution in the last 10 or 15 years when we have pushed collaboration and cooperation as part of the decision making in the senior executive ranks. We have, to some degree, diluted the need for the executives to always be right, and we have increased this idea that everyone gets to have an opinion. One of the unforeseen consequences of all of that is decisions are delayed. And sometimes they're delayed and confused so much that you can never find the person who made the original suggestion. It becomes so entailed or entangled in the kind of lantana of meetings and emails. I don't think it necessarily is a bad thing if we went back a little bit to the idea of the senior executive in any situation being able to make decisions. And this is probably going to send a whole lot of people racing around in circles screaming the end is coming, but to put a little bit more power in the terms of the executives, to say, well, in this situation, I'm making the decision. I mean, the ship is sinking and we're not going to sit around and sing Kumbaya while it goes down and celebrate how wonderful a ship it was. We're going to get out, or we're going to start bailing, or whatever else you do. And I think with AI coming on, and you and I have discussed this before, with the advent of AI and AI taking a lot of the process decision-making, the simpler decision-making, the decision-making that doesn't have any emotion involved, or it doesn't have environmental stakes involved, when that comes out, I think executives are going to be more and more in the face of making judgments. And those judgments are not just going to be decisions as they have been in the past. They're going to be, this is my judgment of where we're going. And this is my judgment of how we're dealing with AI and what it's giving us. And this is my judgment about the organisational strategy or future.
And having more time to do that stuff.
Well, certainly they have more time to do it.
Yeah.
They've lost the ability to do it. Because they've been dragged normally into the weeds of process, and sometimes they've run delightfully into the weeds and jumped around in there because it's a great excuse for not doing the other work.
The lantana of emails and meetings, as you described it, which I think is imagery that a lot of executives will probably appreciate.
Oh, yes, look, I think so. And there are some executives who love being in that area because they can continue to say to their boss, look, I can't get involved in that more difficult thing because I have a team who's not up to it, so I have to continue to finish off the work of my team. And most executives, when I first meet them, you ask them how much of their team's work they do. And you'll often find that really good executives spend their first year with a team finishing off their work. The team learns that it only has to do 80% of the work, give it to the boss, and the boss will finish it off, thinking, oh, well, I'm just
under the guise of just checking where I'm at, kind of thing.
I'm just putting the cream on top, etc., etc. Yeah. But that's all being done late at night or on the weekends, and the team is learning, we don't have to finish off. We don't have to take the responsibility of handing in a completed piece of work.
It's that open door policy you were talking about. With all this expectation of greatness and the emotional cost of being in the upper echelons of the executive world, is it still difficult for an executive to show any kind of vulnerability? Is there too much of a gladiatorial instinct built into executives to be able to acknowledge vulnerability?
It's a good question. There's a tendency for executives and CEOs going off to their retreat halfway up a mountain and sitting around a log fire. For someone that's normally the facilitator to say, well, let's talk about what we don't know about you. And people then say, well, what you don't know is that I'm an avid fly fisherman, or I make model railways, which is fine with the executive team. And everyone says, oh, isn't that wonderful? I'm still not sure what that does
Mm.
for the team,
Mm.
except it's a self-invasion of privacy. I certainly don't think that a CEO should be required to, as they so oddly put it, open the kimono.
Is that a phrase?
I think the majority of executives don't want the CEO to open the kimono.
Right.
They want the CEO to know more about them. They don't actually want to know all that much about the CEO, because a lot of what the CEO doesn't tell them, they don't need to know. The fact that they have, 2 Ferraris, a $10 million boat, holiday homes in Portugal, France, and Cairns is not something that I think they need to know. It certainly doesn't, it's not aspirational anymore, particularly as we have moved, I think, forever away from the conditions of abundance to conditions of scarcity or condition of complexity, unlike anything we've been to before. So it isn't abundance. It isn't that old situation where you couldn't fail to make money unless you just blew something up. And the only people who blew things up were some of the sons or daughters of the founder of the organisation. So that greatness often is self-stopping, because the investors in the organisation say, well, look, the founder's got to be pushed a little bit back to the background. Fantastic idea, you've done it really well. Look, I know your kids are really brilliant, but they're not up to scratch. We need to bring in some professional people into the organisation. So that expectation of greatness in the shadow of your father, who was brilliant at building this new company, that's often wiped from their grasp.
Yeah. Well, that's a well played out story in media in Australia, certainly, and across the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
But don't forget, there are some great organisations in this country that were created by one person and are still extraordinary organisations. I think the one that always comes to me is Victoria Coffee.
Yes. Right.
It's just part of the Australian landscape, created by one individual. That's that form of greatness, that person who can still walk and talk as a founder of an organisation that sits tight. But there are plenty of founders who have unfortunately lost the business because of the ill-founded belief in the sons or daughters or nephews and nieces' ability to run it.
So I know this is something that you talk about a lot, the ability for people to be curious and to play and having the opportunity to be bad at things. Does the expectation of greatness on executives meddle with that to a degree that's basically means you need to come in? Is that
Yeah, look, it's integral to it.
Yeah.
The ability to be curious must run alongside the decision to be great. Because curiosity leads to failure and failure leads to growth. You can't succeed without failing. Some of the great thinkers in management and leadership have all said this. You have to be able to fail and then grow from that failure, understand what went wrong, and then rebuild. So I think that's really important. And curiosity is a part of that. If I bang my thumb with this hammer, will it hurt? Yes, it does. How can I bang my hand or my thumb with this hammer and not make it hurt? Well, I have to design a different sort of hammer, or I have to design a guard for my thumb, so it's that curiosity, and that's still hurting if I keep still. But at some stage, I mean, was it Edison who said something about he designed 11,000 toasters before he found one that worked? So yeah, it's that failure. The problem, I think, is our expectation now is that failure doesn't occur.
Yeah.
The stakeholders and owners and shareholders won't allow failure. They have no stomach for failure anymore. Whereas I think that when I was younger, some of the good investors would tolerate failure where they could see that the people in the organisation they were investing in were working to understand something. Of course, the research areas in cancer and all sorts of medical areas, they build their entire research on failure, because once they've failed something, they learn where to go to after that. But where you have a commercial entity where you've invested money and you expect a return, I think 10, 20 years ago, the investors were much more open to failure than they are now.
Yeah.
And I think, for instance, company reporting now is on a quarterly basis. 10, 15 years ago, it was on a yearly basis. I mean, I think every company having to report to shareholders on a kind of AGM every 3 months is an absurdity.
Well, it's too easy to now, I suppose. So there's no reason.
Well, I mean, it allows the shareholders to think nothing's happened, so that must be good.
What about, have you ever had to coach somebody away from a goal that they thought was hitting their greatness and help them redefine it into something different that's actually more useful or healthier or overall a more valuable sort of goal?
I've worked with people to redefine goal in terms of purpose.
Right.
So you've set a goal that you want this, but it's inconsistent with your own personal purpose. So how can that change? I want a house mortgage-free worth $5 million by the time I'm 40. Okay, that's fine. But you also have a deep purpose of helping people, etc.,
Yes.
etc. How consistent is that? And so you do that by questions. That is very much a challenging question type coaching. So yes, often the personal goals of executives don't give enough energy, and if I can say romance, to the strategic goals of an organisation. The passion is dried up by the personal goal, and there's not enough left for the corporate goal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. But I suppose making sure that your clients are receptive enough to not just have that kind of, I guess, blinkered purpose, to understand the value of the greater purpose, basically explains the worth of an executive coach, doesn't it?
Yes, well, I think the blinkered comes with the goal. I want this.
Yeah.
The purpose has much more romance to it.
Yeah. All right, last question for today. We've been talking about executives and their expectation of their greatness, our expectation of their greatness, etc. Let's turn it around on executive coaches. What expectation of greatness should we have for executive coaches, and what expectation of greatness do executive coaches have for yourself?
I have very little expectation of greatness in relation to coaching, because it is almost a channel for me, for my clients. The anonymity of coaching appeals to me. So I have very little expectation, except that every time I step into a coaching situation, I give everything I possibly can. I think there are some executive coaches who want more publicity than anonymity. And so that becomes how they build their brand and their business, and that's different. As soon as you want to build a brand, then you're in a different world to the one that I inhabit. But I think clients expect greatness from their coaches because they expect to be able to rely on the coaches, and that's not unreasonable. But the coach, in finding their greatness, must find it in honesty, in humility, and in deep respect for not only the person they're coaching, but the people who rely on that person.
Yeah, it's a kind of, I suppose, invisible greatness almost. You want to be there, but a kind of facilitating presence rather than a dominating presence, obviously.
One of the compliments that I will always remember was from someone who I coached him into a very, very senior, very large CEO role, and the day it was announced, he rang me and he said, "Look, I would not have gotten this job without you." And that was the high praise. And that's as far as I'd ever want the praise to go.
Next week, we are going to talk about how AI is potentially going to affect not only the corporate world, executive class, but also how you coach.
Yes, let's talk about the impact coaching can have
Yeah.
on an AI world. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, Peter, and talk again next week.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stuart. Enjoy the questioning.